am Dr. Kumudini Pati, an independent researcher associated with the Center of Women's Studies, University of Allahabad. And we are taking up the subject of Women's Studies, paper 15, the stories the states tell. And this is module 14, the women worshippers of goddess Yellamma in Karnataka and Andhra Pradesh. Now, this is about the Devadasi cult, who are worshippers of goddess Yellamma. Who are these Devdasis? Actually, they were women who were traditionally dedicated to goddess Yellamma or Renuka, mainly from Karnataka and Andhra Pradesh, and also some parts of Maharashtra, where the tradition is being carried on in different forms. Now, this whole thing is about the socio-economic dimension of this cult, their contribution, that is the Devdasi's contribution to the arts, the relationship with different kinds of religious beliefs, local superstitions, or even blind faith, and the myths which surround this goddess Yellamma, who is the main female deity who is worshipped and to whom these girls are offered as Devdasis. The Devdasi cult became quite weak after the British rulers came and they started working. This was in the 19th century and the early 20th century, that they were working along with the reformists and the abolitionists to abolish this dedication of women in the name of religious faith. Although it is true that the Devdasis were highly respected and they were great connoisseurs and also preservers of the art of the dance forms in India, which we call the classical dance forms. Then laws were put into place to stop this practice, but the lawmakers did not actually understand the agency of these women or the spiritual commitment behind this practice of Devdasis. Now, we can say that officially, because it is illegal to dedicate women in the name of Devdasis, so the practice is supposed to be dead. But what we see in society is that this has got transformed into a thriving business, and this business surrounds and is centered around the mortal bodies of the Devdasis. Now, what is the history of the Devdasi tradition? The tradition of dedicating girls to goddess Yellamma actually dates back to the period of the Puranas from the 6th century AD, and it was continued during the time of the Pallava dynasty and the Chola dynasty in South India. And this gave rise to some kind of temple prostitutes in India, and this continued in the 9th and the 10th centuries as well. Now, whenever there was a festive occasion, then lots of religious, traditional kind of fervor was there, and some kinds of celebrations were there, and those celebrations could not be completed in a temple without the performance of these temple girls who were called Devdasis. The Devdasis used to do most of the duties which were attached to the temple. At the same time, they used to be performers of classical dance in the temple premises. So, hence the employment of these dancing girls became customary, and it became part of the temple Devathana rituals, and actually gradually it became an institution as a professional organization. And then you can also see that when Buddhism was on the decline, many Buddhist nuns who had to leave the seminaries finally became Devdasis. Now, why did women become Devdasis? That is one question that has to be answered. Girls from different class backgrounds, but mostly they were girls who were poor, whose families had been finding it very difficult to make an earning. So, these families, mostly from Dalit or lower caste or intermediary caste, were trying to make a living by offering their daughters as a religious custom to the mighty temples. And these temples were the centers of social and political power. They were patronized by kings and vice versa. So, these women who were the Devdasis were performing many tasks which surrounded the temple. For example, they were providing some kind of entertainment to the kings and to the noblemen and also to the temple priests. They were dancing and singing, and they were playing many musical instruments and accompaniments, and also they were maintaining the gardens, maintaining the livestock, and washing the temple idols or artifacts, lamps, and they were making flower garlands, bouquets, and they were cleaning the floors and cleaning the deities and dressing them regularly. So, these kinds of work the Devdasis were doing inside the temple and around the temple. Now, Devdasis became finally the source of pleasure for a section of society which was high and mighty. The majority of the Devdasis in temples had become the targets of pleasure seekers among the Brahmins, especially the temple priests and also the kings. And there was a big conflict that started between the Brahmins and the kings, because the kings wanted a certain section of the more beautiful Devdasis and the Brahmins wanted them for their own satisfaction and pleasure. So, finally, there was a way in which they were separated, and that was their chest used to be branded with some kind of an emblem. Either it was the Garuda or the Chakra for the kings, and it used to be the Shankh for the Brahmins. Now, the Devdasis were confined to temple dances, but it is evident that whatever may be the historical background of this tradition, today Devdasi has become a euphemism for a prostitute. Actually, she has become a cheap prostitute who has to work under the patronage of a certain temple or under certain priests. Now, when a girl is given in offering or she is married to the deity, then she is not able to marry any other man. She cannot marry any other person. And on attaining puberty, actually her parents keep the girl in their house till she attains puberty, and then she has to undergo some kind of an initiation ceremony. So, the parents have to go and inform the temple that their daughter has come of age, and then there is a big dedication ceremony which has lots of people coming, and it has to be done with lot of pomp and show, and that is called this initiation ceremony, which is like a marriage. And then there is a ritual that happens. The girl is formally, she is decked up and she is formally dedicated to the mother goddess, and then there is a deflowering ceremony known as Uditam Bhavadu in some parts of the country, and the priests first use or first have intercourse with every girl who is enrolled in the temple, and once they are officially taken, they cannot marry anybody else, and they have to sustain themselves through either ceremonial begging, like they become yoginis and beg, or they have to depend on alms which are given by noblemen. Now, this cult is prevalent in many forms throughout India to this day, and to a large extent it is present in Belgaum, in Bidar, in Bijapur, Gulbarg, in northern Karnataka. And here we see that the National Commission for Women Now, it says that many of the girls who belong to the Dalit community, specifically the lower section of society, they are dedicated most of the time, and these things are being noticed in the Kondabba temple and also in several temples in Karnataka border. Now, we have a list of many districts of Andhra Pradesh, especially the Telangana and the Rayalaseema areas, and we have the numbers of such women who have been dedicated as Devdasis. Of course, the official figure that is given is 24,273, but actually the number is very large. It is about 80,000 women who are still there as Devdasis only in Andhra Pradesh. Now, we had several efforts to somehow finish off with this tradition, because it was an exploitative tradition. So, there were laws and there were commissions that were formed, and they went into the details of this whole Devdasi cult. State laws like the Bombay Devdasi Protection Act of 1934 came, and then the Prohibition of Dedication Act 1982 of the Karnataka rules, and the amendment of the act which came in 2009. And then there was this Andhra Pradesh Devdasi Prohibition of Dedication in 1988, and the Madras Devadasi Prohibition Act of 1947. So, all these acts have been in place, and they have tried to somehow stop this practice from taking place. But Justice Raghunath Rao, who was appointed at that time by the Chief Minister N.K. Reddy on the direction of the Supreme Court, had responded to a PIL, and he had made a study of Andhra Pradesh and Telangana, and he found that this social menace is prevalent in almost every district in both the states. And when he submitted his report, the number was around 80,000, which is a very huge number. So, we cannot say that the system has come to an end despite the many acts that have been formed. Now, the government thought of another way of somehow bringing these women into the mainstream, and that was some kind of a rehabilitation program. The government planned to appoint Devdasi dedication prohibition officers who would be public servants, but they would have the powers of police officers, and the government started including the NGOs, the officers from Gram Panchayats and municipalities, and also public sector undertakings to help these DDPOs. And these DDPOs were supposed to prevent the dedication of these Devdasis, and somehow if they had evidence, they could effectively prosecute those who were accused. And they also conducted sensitization programs among the people. Now, there was some kind of financial assistance also given for remarriage of the Devdasis, and this was done by the Department of Women and Child of Karnataka. And as per the provisions of the act, each of these Jogins were identified, and when they were released, they were given 10,000 rupees as some kind of a rehabilitation grant, although it is a very, very paltry sum of money, but still it was given by the Social Welfare Department as a provision of this act. And then in these states also, they were trying to give pension, housing, microcredit, and also some kind of vocational training or education, or help through the Dwakra groups to women and children in rural areas. And they were also participating in self-help groups. Now, what is the life of the present day Devadasis? If you see that the Devadasis are totally segregated from the mainstream village, and it is pathetic to see that they are treated almost like untouchables. And when they become very old, they are of no use, and they have to just keep begging to keep themselves alive. But by giving some few acres of land for rehabilitation of the ex-Devdasis, we are not able to erase the stigma which has been attached to their work. They are still considered as some women of low virtue, and they are not accommodated in the society. The families of the Devdasis are generally women headed, and nobody is prepared to marry them or take them back into the family. So, they are never accepted by the village community, and many then end up with sexually transmitted diseases which are not treated because of poverty. So, they have AIDS, and many of them die because of AIDS. Many poor low caste women are also sexually exploited by this system, and they become regular prostitutes. Soon after the initiation, she has to live a life of a chief prostitute, either at a nearby brothel or some kind of a city brothel. And when another person enters the market, then the value of the older woman, who might be just 30 years or 35 years, is just very low in the market, and sometimes she has to work only for 30 rupees a day or 50 rupees a day, and she is of no use to anyone anymore. Now, the dance forms which had come from the Devdasi tradition are the classical dance forms of Kuchipudi, of Bharatnatyam, of Mohiniyattam, of Odissi. The Britishers used to call them the Nautch girls of India, and because dance and spirituality were not opposed to each other in India, so they used to continue as the temple dancers. The Devdasi cult in contemporary times has become a very evil system, and many poor Dalit backward caste women are exploited in the name of religion. Poverty and blind faith also somehow augment this, and unemployment is a major factor that has been responsible for the Devdasi cult to continue. So, somehow we have to have a policy where cultural and economic, social rehabilitation of the Devdasis is essential, so that they can be free from social stigma, they can be respected, and they can be taken as preservers of the tradition of our classical arts in India, and they can be integrated into the national mainstream. Thank you.